Good afternoon, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us. As a quick intro, my name's Jamie Hillier. I'm a partner of Akerlof. We're a consultancy specialising in modern methods construction. And for the next hour and a quarter, I think it is, I'm chair of a discussion entitled Creating Standardised Platforms and Components. So I guess given where I'm stood, I'm of course inherently biased, but for me I think the discussion is potentially the most interesting presentation you'll hear during the 3 days of Future Build, not only because of the subject matter we're going to cover, but more importantly because my esteemed guests sat down here. So I'll get to introductions shortly, but I'd just like to quickly begin by outlining the significance of platform thinking. Platforms, as I think you'll hear today, can certainly mean many things to many people. Each of our speakers will clarify in what context and definition it applies to them. But the headline principles are in effect a set of core standardised assets, whether that be components, processes, knowledge or people that are replicated multiple times, and in doing so create efficiencies alongside a complementary set of peripheral components that are variable, along with a consistent interface between standardisation and variation. Now when I wrote that down, it actually confused me, and I appreciate it may sound slightly too abstract, so rest assured our speakers will provide better clarity than I have managed just now. For those of you in the audience, and I guess as a bit of a shameless plug to Jackie Glass as well, I'd equally steer you towards the recent publication from Network Plus entitled Platform Thinking for Construction that provides some really good, strong academic research around that subject matter, and I know you can find copies of that over at the Transforming Construction stand. So why does this topic have currency? Well, from a broader perspective, platforms provide competitive advantage. They underpin many of the world's most valuable companies. And I'm sure as the audience, you will purchase and use platform-based solutions and products as part of your daily lives. In the context of construction, the gravitation towards platform solutions is a growing trend. And it's an area that the Infrastructure Projects Authority proactively sought to understand this time last year when they opened the call for evidence relating to platform approach to DFMA, stimulating debate as to how we might achieve commonality in a construction industry that is so readily accustomed to variety. So with me today to progress this debate, we have Jamie Cresser-Brown as Director of Bride & Wood. Jamie works at the very heart of harnessing solutions that intersect DFMA, digital innovation and good quality architecture. And Jamie will be talking through her work on Prism, but equally is being involved with Seismic, which I think links perfectly to both David Clark, Manufacturing Director at McAvoy Group, and Jim Cow, who's the UK Technical Director at Elliott. And without wishing to steal their thunder, Seismic has engaged many parties, but significantly, in my language, has created common ground amongst uncommon allies. It's market competitors working together to develop standardisation. And outlining the Construction Innovation Hub's platform solution, we have three individuals. We have Ron Lang, who is the Impact Director for Value from the CIH. We have Adam Robinson, who is Head of Research Programme for Centre for Digital Built Britain, and Mark Ireland, who is the Chief Engineer at MTC. So those gents will be outlining the work the Hub are leading in collaboration with a breadth of industry players to develop the platform solution and a proof of concept build. So can I please invite Ron, Mark, Adam to the stage to kick off the discussion.
Hello everyone. So I'm not going to spend too much time personally because I want to get straight to my colleagues in the Hub. What I did want to do was just to try and contextualise slightly why the Hub is looking at platforms and how it fits in with our broader scheme of work. So very briefly, I'm hoping most of you know where we're coming from really, but the Hub is born out of many reports over many years. I've put up here Construction 2025 objectives. We all know as an industry, I think, where we need to go. We're part of the industrial strategy, and we're part of the clean growth part there, so nice touch. And I hope you've all been to the Transforming Construction stand, by the way, because there's a huge amount of things there. You've stolen my thunder, by the way, Jamie, so I was also going to plug Network Plus, but we can do that separately. So very, very briefly, the construction sector deal has funded 170 million government funding, which is certainly from my perspective quite a game changer. This is the first time we've seen some real investment from government in the sector, and also where the government want to actually lead this. So Jamie mentioned the IPA consultation. I think that was a really good indication of the fact that the government is serious about this, and we're certainly taking it very, very seriously. So the Construction Innovation Hub particularly has £72 million for 4 million for a 4 year, sorry, not 4 million years, a 4-year program. As was mentioned, that's a collection of very nicely matched businesses. So we have the Building Research Establishment, we have the Manufacturing Technology Centre, which Mark will represent, and we have the Centre for Digital Build Britain. So down to really why I just wanted to, a little bit before the guys talk about what we're actually going to do, the Construction Innovation Hub is really structured into 4 key themes. And I'll take them in a slightly different order so I can get my point across. We're interested in value, so we're interested in working with government to drive value-based procurement and value-driven and outcome-driven decision-makings in construction. It's very important, and it's got a huge amount of momentum right now. We're also interested in assurance and where assurance needs to go in the future. And in the context of what we're talking about today, that's quite varied. That's from kits of parts that have properly certified and have been properly checked, and that every interface has been tested and go together properly. But it's also post-Hackett really, where is the future of building regulations and how might that drive a more manufactured approach to construction, I think is quite interesting. And then we have digital. We all know, I don't need to say anything about the fact that digital is upon us and it changes everything we do, and Adam will talk a little bit about how we're looking at that. But the reason I wanted to talk about those 3 things is that we believe our hypothesis, if you like, as the hub, is that over the next 10 years particularly, and accelerating beyond, that manufactured construction is going to be the way forward and the way to deliver better value, the way to deliver digital approaches, and certainly the way to deliver better assurance. So I wanted to talk about that because I think it's interesting to understand that we're doing a lot of work around platform, and you'll see that, but actually unless we start to drive the right kind of behaviours, unless we start to drive digital approaches, manufacturing won't get the kind of airtime that it needs. So again, it's already been mentioned, but I have a picture, so there it is. I would highly encourage you to check this out, and the reason that I'm so enthusiastic about it is that as soon as we start to look at this, and I think everybody on the stand will probably agree with me, terminology becomes a bit of a problem. We're trying to merge 2 worlds here. We're trying to merge the world of manufacturing and construction, and actually just trying to sort some of that terminology out is really helpful for us. So I really would encourage you to look at that and to absorb the content there, and we'll be hopefully working with Network Plus going forwards to carry on that discussion. So I'm going to pass on to Mark.
Hi everyone, so my name's Mark Ireland, I'm Chief Engineer at the Manufacturing Technology Centre. And when we kicked off this platform component set programme, one of the things that I always want to draw us back to is what we promised we would do at the outset. So when the programme was initiated, we promised that we would be implementing at scale a solution for our public sector clients. We said that we would be looking at reducing cost, delivery time and carbon emissions, and we said we'd also look at productivity and whole life value. And we wanted the opportunity to integrate some of the skills and capabilities from some of the other partners who are funded by Innovate UK, and specifically one of those is Active Building Centre, which takes us on to the bottom bullet point, which is making sure that we integrate renewable and energy systems into a whole system rather than as components that are added afterwards. Now, my role is as a manufacturing engineer. I have a biased view of the world. I have a whole 20 years worth of university experience, graduate training, and then working as a manufacturing engineer. And my view of the world is very process focused. If someone is designing something, I need to know how I'm going to make it such that when they've designed it, I know exactly all the steps that are going to go into its manufacture. My experience of the construction sector is it is very product focused. We design buildings and then we work out how we're going to make them. And what that means is that every product ends up being manufactured in a different way, or constructed in a different way, or assembled in a different way, depending on your terminology. And as I say, we establish how we're going to make it once we've designed it. We may have some good design for manufacture and assembly, but you're still fundamentally designing a building and then working out how you're going to make it. That means you're very reliant on the skilled trades and the crafts and the people who are going to make it happen. And your quality is very dependent on the people who do it. you also end up with this transient way that a workforce moves, that you build it and then you move on. And I say to some of these guys, can you imagine if the paint shop at Jaguar Land Rover or the interior shop was run by a different group of people on every single car that they made, and hoping to get the same quality in every vehicle that they make? It's just, as a manufacturing engineer, it doesn't quite feel right. So what we're doing with the Construction Innovation Hub program is making sure that we have a process view of construction. So what we're doing is making sure that every product that we design is made using the same manufacturing process. And that means that when we start doing design, we already know how we're going to make it. Doing that enables us to have multi-skilled workers who aren't your typical builder or plumber or sparky or chippy that we have today. These are people who do assembly activities, testing activities, rather than people who carry everything in their heads. The quality can then be dependent on the design rather than the skills of those people. And it means we can bake in things like ongoing continuous improvement, which are a given from most manufacturing sectors. Now, to try and make this happen on the Construction Innovation Hub, we've had to think very differently about the roles of the people in the team. So as Keith said yesterday, our job is to facilitate industry. It's not to do this for industry. And to try and do that, we've come up with these terms, these roles, and they are different to the way that the industry currently operates. So the top level role here is integrator, and the role of integrator is very much an assembly organisation. The integrators are pulling together standard sub-assemblies, they are configuring them to meet a set of needs, they are assembling them hopefully with their own team, their own specialist equipment, and once a building is finished, they will warrant and assure the performance of that building through its life. Now, the reason for this change, I can give you an example. If you look at something like the Boeing 737 MAX failures that unfortunately happened last year, the first person that everybody pointed out was Boeing. Whereas in the construction sector, we haven't got that same accountability or obviousness of accountability that we have from other manufacturing sectors. And what we're trying to achieve with the integrator role is this same accountability on those people who assemble these buildings. They don't contract it out, basically. Now, the sub-assembly one role are the companies that make the sub-assemblies that the integrators are going to use. And we had in a previous presentation from HTA the example of engines. So sub-assembly one organisation are making the engines that the integrators integrate into their buildings. Now what that means is we can effectively have competition between different sub-assembly one organisations. So if we were looking at something like a building structural frame, the integrator shouldn't really mind whether it comes from company A, company B or company C. As long as they all perform the same job, the measure of value can be applied to those three solutions. The sub-assembly 2 companies are the people who make the bits. So again, from the HTA organisation, these are the sort of people who might make boilers or utility cupboards or components that go into assemblies. Next role is components and materials, and we've got some great tacit information from people like Tata Steel who've told us we have a steel mill which rolls at a certain width. If the construction sector standardised around that certain width, it makes our life a whole lot easier. If a floor to ceiling height varies from 2.75 to 2.8 to 2.95 to 3.15, we can't get a standard component off our rolling mill, which adds additional cost into the process. So if we can take into account the capabilities of our component and material suppliers, that is true design for manufacture. The last role that we've got on here is platform development consultants, and those companies and specialists are here to try and make sure that we don't come up with something that is boring, isn't architecturally beautiful, doesn't take into account the lessons that have been learned over the many years that we've been doing this. Now, to give you an example of the roles across the construction system, we've come up with this graph. So we've said that we're working for the public sector organisations, and they're reflected on the right-hand side. The hub's construction system is only the top row on this graph. And what we're saying is in the future, you may have collaborative consortia who come up with lots more construction systems, lots more platforms to do different jobs, like housing and high-rise and other specialist applications. The other thing that we've reflected is that it doesn't preclude conventional construction. So if the components and materials people are standardising the way that they deliver lengths of steel, those can still have a benefit into a conventional way of building buildings. It has a benefit to the whole sector. But the real specific I want you to take from this slide is the Construction Innovation Hub platform is only working for one subset of everything that we need. And that subset, we think the sweet spot is buildings between 2,000 and 5,000 metres squared and up to 4 stories, being used for single living accommodation, classrooms, consulting rooms, control rooms, prison cells, that kind of application. So one of the first tests would always be for our integrators, if somebody comes to them and says, we want to use your platform to do a 15-story student accommodation block, the first question would be, does it meet this criteria that we've taken as our specification? Because if it doesn't, you need to look for a different solution or a different version of that platform. Now, I've talked about the Subassembly 1 organisations, and what we've done is we've worked with the companies who are coming in as the role of integrator, and we've tried to look at standard sub-assemblies that those integrators can use. And we've managed to come up with 13 predefined sub-assemblies, which will be the 13 that everybody configures and buys from. And we want to come up with standard specifications and interfaces to allow our Subassembly 1 organisations to compete on all 13 of these sub-assemblies. Now that ranges from foundation systems, ground floors, cores, risers, plant rooms, ceiling cassettes, the whole suite of bits that you need to build a building. And over the last year we've been engaging with industry and we've been working out who are the people who want to come and collaborate together, even though they may be potential competition in the future. And unfortunately this slide doesn't quite present very well on this size of screen, but what this diagram shows is the 40 odd organisations who are now part of this platform programme. And I'm really privileged because this is the first time we've published this in full detail. There is a press release that's gone out to talk about the 8 integrators. So if I manage to zoom in, there we go. So our integrators across the top have all been interviewed for the role. We've made sure that they're doing this for the right reason. They're all prepared to collaborate and they understand the benefits of collaboration. And I'm really proud to say that we've got Skanska, Mott MacDonald, a joint venture between Vinci Kia, BAM, Mace, a great startup called Midgroup, and another small company called PCE. And they are the 8 companies who can work together to be this integrator of the future. You can see down this right-hand side of the chart all the different 13 systems that I talked about, so foundation systems, structural frame, everything else. And you can see these yellow boxes are the Subassembly 1 organisations who are going to be making these components. And we're seeing some really nice examples. So this bit is all about foundation systems, this bit at the top. And we have Keltbray, Roger Bullivant and Cemex all saying that they want to be Subassembly 1 organisations. In the future, they all want to compete with each other. But they want to have a standard way that a system can work which allows them to compete on a level playing field and doing it the same way every time. So for people who want to see more information about this, come and speak to us at the Construction Innovation Hub. We're really proud of the 40 odd organisations who've joined us as this collaborative effort. Now, yesterday Keith was saying that our job is to transform the sector, and part of that is helping these companies to collaborate together. Another part of it that we're really passionate about is skills and changing the skill set that the industry currently has. And to do that, we've come up with what I term an equivalent of a manufacturing engineering degree for construction organisations. And for those 40 companies who are part of the platform programme, we're going to be taking them through very specific training on some of the tools that are going to embed a process-driven and manufacturing view for the construction sector. And that training isn't just being delivered by the MTC or NCC MTC, BRE or CDBB, who are the Construction Innovation Hub partners. We're also working with other companies like National Composite Centre, who have real skills and capability in composites that they can bring to the programme. The last one from me is talking about how racy this programme is. So these are the major gates that we've got to hit over the next 2 and a bit years. We need to have come up with a specification for this platform system for those buildings 2,000 to 5,000 metres squared by the middle of this year. We then need to have done our preliminary design and had design approval by the end of the year, and that allows us to do all of our designs and methods and manufacturing and prototyping by January 2022. What we're then hoping to do is demonstrate, validate and test all of these components through a series of work across MTC, BRE and CDBB, assessing that design physically, digitally and in full scale, allowing us to test interfaces, sub-assemblies and ultimately a whole building level. So I'm going to hand over to Adam, who's going to talk a bit about how we're going to do some of that digital work.
Hello, I'm Adam Robinson, Head of Research at CDBB, and we'll close out our presentation by highlighting digital tools as a critical enabling technology for a platform approach to construction. So in the diagram on the screen, the central portion is made up of the physical platform that Mark's just described. And we see that sitting within a suite of digital tools that provide a digitalization of processes. And between the two, we have a layer of digitized standards and so on that enable the communication between the two. The central portion is defined by its interoperability standards and functional specifications. The digitization will involve digitization of component libraries, product data and asset data, looking at digital specifications and standards. The tools, the suite of tools, will encompass possibly quite a large range. We envisage a design configurator which will be used to put buildings together, whole life performance evaluation, digital compliance checking and so on, leading up to the development of digital twins that can be used for asset management through life. Some key enablers feed into this, which we're pursuing within the hub. We're looking at producing consolidated requirements that we use to define our platform approach. We have a value and assurance stream or framework within the hub that will help us assess testing and how we manage value and so on. And digital tools should enable us to define an information management framework which will underpin a lot of this activity, help define commercial models to enable the approach and ensure supply chain readiness. So this suite of tools we see opening out to form a workflow, and an example workflow we can go through here, which is not exhaustive. We imagine as we work with industry we will build on this even more. To the left-hand side we have a series of tasks which will take us up to the development of the platform system. So we develop a system logic, functional specifications, we design and build components and test them. And the right-hand side then takes us to development of the asset itself. So we design the asset, go through delivery and go through operation. Alongside that, we have a digital environment which is underpinned by an information management framework, and we will ensure interoperability between these tools to ensure that there's a data flow through life. We will look at producing product data templates and component libraries, compliance tools for checking the platform and the asset, and we will work towards developing a digital twin which will be developed through asset delivery and used to manage the device. The outputs from the hub that will feed into this, again not exhaustive, but we'll be working towards product data libraries, new methods for testing new products and materials that we will develop, digital compliance tools and methods for producing smart buildings and digital twins. We'll do this by building on work that is ongoing within the hub already. We'll make sure that we are compliant with the Gemini principles that have come out of the hub, and we will use tools and practices that are being developed within the UK BIM framework. And we will continue to build these with our industrial partners to ensure that tools that are being developed are done with common requirements, interoperability as standard.
Hi, I'm Jamie Cresser-Brown. I'm an architect and director of creative technologies at Brydenwood. So today we've heard quite a lot about physical platforms, and what I wanted to do was talk about physical platforms and how that links to digital platforms. Ooh, what's going on with the... Okay. Okay, so there's a lot of general skepticism and paranoia about automation and the impact that this has on the built environment, and particularly people's jobs. So here's some extracts of articles that have been released recently about automation. So how at risk is your job from automation? The robots are definitely coming, and we will make the world a more unequal place. And rise of artificial intelligence means architects are doomed. So I did a job search at the weekend just to see what would come up if I typed in automation architect. And there were only about 1,000 results. And this is about 1 in 20 of what comes up if you type in architects. So are we all really doomed? It seems unlikely that architects are about to be directly replaced by robots. But the role of the designer is definitely changing. And we as designers need to embrace that change and not fear it. We need to let our computational ability to supercharge our design processes and allow us to design faster and smarter than ever before. The greatest benefits will come when we embed our knowledge into the design process, so that enabling us to work not only faster, but also smarter. So, how can we design for automation? The answer to this is rules. We need to articulate design as a series of rules. First of all, that's spatial rules. So, as we saw previously, certain typologies lend themselves very, very directly to spatial design rules, such as schools. There's a very strict, rigid schedule of accommodation for designing schools that clearly sets out room, areas, adjacencies, independencies, those kinds of things. So if we can start to understand our spatial requirements in terms of rules, that's one step. Secondly, manufacturing rules. Rules governing the way that we construct our buildings. And that's exactly what platforms is, and platforms as an approach to construction. So platforms involve manufactured solutions that are a set of components that go together in predefined ways. They're pre-engineered, and they're put together using productive processes, and that enables us to be really familiar with the construction process. So the greatest benefits can come if we simultaneously design for manufacture and design for automation. This is linking physical platforms and digital platforms together. So designers sometimes think in terms of rules, but they often unknowingly, but rarely explicitly. So what we need to stop doing is trying to define our design decisions in terms of sometimes, maybe, and it depends, and instead start to define spatial rules and construction rules more mathematically. So current industry focus is, there's a lot of emphasis on BIM. BIM sitting at the center of our processes. And BIM is often seen as the cornerstone to design. But an automated approach should no longer place BIM in the center of the process. BIM is simply an output with data sat at the core. Data which can be represented in many different ways, dependent on what it's being used for. So this week at FutureBuild, we've been demoing our new automated design workflow for housing. It's called Prism to Platforms. I'm sure many of you will be aware of our open source web app that we recently released back in about a year ago with Cast and the Mayor of London. to accelerate the design of precision manufacturing for London. What we've done is we've taken that initial piece of work and developed an automated workflow that supercharges the design process to get you to a full platform BIM model of your housing design in a matter of minutes. So we're able to do this because we understand the rules behind the platform system. Here we're using Platform 2 being the system suitable for mid-span buildings. We've got a similar system for smaller span buildings and larger span buildings for offices, etc. So we're using Platform 2. I'm going to play a video that demonstrates the workflow from end to end. It goes quite quickly. It fast rewinds the process at the beginning, and I'll just talk slightly over the top of the slide, over the top of the video. So as I said initially, this process starts from Prism, our open source web app that we released last year. Here you're setting your user brief for your specific design scheme, setting your floor-to-floor heights, your unit mix, your key dimensional requirements, and then you save your configuration file. In this instance, we're saving to a database. We're then loading this into a front-end application that's running and generating the platform solution based on our physical platform rules in Grasshopper. So this is a data model. That data model contains all of the data points of the beams, columns, walls, doors, sockets, lights, based on the configuration that you've done in Prism. We're then simulating that design to interrogate our design decisions in another web app. And from there, we're exporting that data rules model into BIM and populating that with our physical platform components. That's when we're generating the geometry of our building. The data model that was produced in Grasshopper, so it's a series of lines and points representative of where all of the platform parts need to go. You can get full quantification of your design in terms of numbers of parts at that point. You don't need to get to a fully designed BIM model. That can be an optional output. And because you can do this so quickly and you can assess and simulate against your design so quickly, it enables you to explore more options in less time. So the image in the background, that is our data model, the points and the lines all being representative of different kinds of platform parts. So you can see along the bottom, everything is fully quantified at this stage. It takes a matter of minutes to get to this. And we've been demoing this on our stand for the past 3 days, and here are some of the designs that have been produced by willing participants. And all of these you can see on the bottom left-hand side, there's a timestamp against those. So this is an indication of how long that platform building took to generate using our workflow. And that ranges from about 1 to 11 minutes. It takes longer to generate the geometry just because the Autodesk software side of the workflow is a little bit slower. If you're interested to learn a bit more, then we're still demoing over on our stand C70. It's got bright pink carpet, so you can't miss it. So automated design, we are working on this for a number of different clients and different typologies. So we've done, as you saw earlier, and as Jim played, we've done a similar configuration tool for schools. We've obviously released the open source web app Prism for designing housing, but we're also doing similar, we've done similar automated design workflows for rail and for roads. So here's some little video clips. These two are open source. Is this going to play? And this is some of the work that we've done for Highways England and also Network Rail. And I think we're all architects, but we're still able to get involved into different sectors because of our different approach and the way we think about automation. I also wanted to just give you a little update on Prism. So we're about to relaunch this in about 3 to 4 weeks' time. I think it's the end of March, and this is a little sneak preview of the new interface. And one of the things that will be in this next release is platforms as an option for learning about whether your system is suitable for being manufactured by that particular system. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, some really interesting stuff there around generative and computational design, which I think gives us a glimpse into what is moving at pace certainly in the design fraternity. So, by my reckoning, unless this man tells me otherwise, I think we've got about 25 minutes for questions and discussion. Have we got any microphones for the audience at all? There we go. So I guess I'll open it up to the floor. Has anyone got a particular question? Nigel, would you like to? If you can stand up, introduce yourself, please, and then I'll direct it to the panel.
Hello, Nigel Fraser from Build Offsite. Very interested in, I think it was one of Adam's slides where he had the processes on the right. I'm just keen on two things. One is that we learn from some of the things that have already been done. So I know that at BAA some while ago, we actually we used QFD and we did all those steps through to supplier readiness planning. So there's some lessons that have been learned from that I hope we can somehow feed in. But the other thing that we learned in that process was that the procurement process is incredibly important. And if you change the procurement strategy, then you can lose a lot of the benefits. Or you can not all procurement processes are completely compatible with using platforms, so it's worth having, I think, a work stream around procurement as well.
Okay, so if I've heard you correctly, I guess there's two questions in there for the panel. One is Nigel's first piece around if he's got experiences, particularly on QFD, who should he speak to and how does he feed that into the hub? I don't know if who wants to take that at all. I assume that's you then, Ron. Okay, and while you're playing with the microphone, I guess the second part is, and we'll open it up to the floor, will be around procurement processes and how that's impacted in some of the work you've done. So, Ron, are you okay picking up the first part, please?
I'll have a go. Adam looks keen. He's leaned forward, so I don't know who's going to contribute. I'm going to do them in reverse. Well, in fact, I won't. The first question, absolutely, you should feed into us. The hub is working with Build Offsite anyway, so I think that's a good opportunity to do that. So that's great. Thank you. On the second procurement point, I probably didn't spend as much time as we could have done on that, but what I was trying to say in the positioning of what the hub is doing is, yes, it's about a technical solution, and Mark has very eloquently taken you through what we're trying to achieve there, but there's two angles to this. Unless the supply chain is ready to actually deliver this thing for us and has the capability to do so, it's not going to work. And unless the government know, firstly, how to ask for it, so there's something there about consolidated demand and consolidated requirements. Unless they ask for things in a way that suits a platform approach, it's not going to work. Unless they can procure it, as you quite rightly say, it's not going to work. So we have work streams in procurement. We're working with the Construction Leadership Council on the procurement for value work. So within that value work stream, it's about how do we get the government to ask for properly valued things to deliver better outcomes. It's then how they actually procure those things, and then it's whether the supply chain is actually capable and ready to deliver them. So we've got some good examples here of some thought leaders and some people at the front of this process, but we need to do a huge amount of upskilling. I think Mark will agree with me. We're really encouraged by the number of organisations we're now working with that see this as a potential thing, and competing organisations, just as the seismic guys have mentioned. So we are making quite big strides. It's just hard to summarise everything we're doing, I guess, into a short presentation.
Okay. Adam, would you like to add anything to that?
So we actually have a series of projects around specifically procurement within Cambridge, within academia, and within BRE and MTC. So we will be looking for industry involvement in some of those projects. So one in particular we're currently scoping is creation of an effective digital twin of the procurement process. So we can model. Can you hear? Okay. Yeah. So we can model the procurement methods, contracting methods, business models, and so on, and see how that impacts the construction system using offsite and platform. So we are pursuing it quite heavily. We recognise it's going to be an important enabling.
Okay, can I just ask David and Jim, you're obviously the more mature, far more mature end of the volumetric market. Is there anything you'd like to add, I guess, in addressing Nigel's question around how procurement influences your terms of engagement and offering your platform solution?
Yeah, I mean, we've been very lucky to be working with the DFE for the last 2-3 years, and the DFE have certainly taken a forward-looking view of how that's working through the Mod A framework, Mod B, C, and now into MMC1. So some of the initiatives that they've put in place, including direct award, have certainly helped in terms of us delivering the component design that we've used. So we've certainly, from an Elliott point of view now, delivered 11 primary schools, all using the same component system. And that's really been facilitated by the early work that the DFE did.
Okay.
Yeah, I suppose I can't really add much to that other than just the key thing there, that client engagement, ensuring our clients are engaged in this process, because they ultimately need to buy into this as well.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the floor at all? Okay, gentleman over there.
I know you touched on it, various of you actually, but when this is all a success and has all become quite mainstream and been adopted as sort of half of the course, what is that going to do to, for example, small project managers looking to be involved in housing association delivery or what have you? Are you sure that this isn't going to leave a great deal of the market in disarray and at a slightly sort of almost like an unfair or a bit of a disadvantage because of that? I'm not saying I think it will, I'm asking you if you do.
Mark's lurched for the microphone, so I'm going to assume you're going first, Mark.
So I wrote an article for Build Offsite probably about 6-9 months ago, talking about exactly that. And this is only my opinion, okay? But if you look at what happened to the automotive industry post-war, I think I worked out in 1957 there were something like 680 companies building cars in the UK, and by 1973 there were only really 3. And what had happened is that in order to be competitive in a global market, the automotive industry had to invest in manufacturing, it had to invest in design, it had to invest in skills. And the companies that were, small, operating out of small factories and sheds, just couldn't compete on a global scale. Now, a lot of the people who did work in the automotive industry ended up still working in the automotive industry, but working for much bigger companies who could make that investment. Now, whether we like it or not, I genuinely think as construction moves into a more manufacturing world, competition becomes harder, because people can design components and ship them in and buy their way onto your platform, whether you like it or not. And a good example of where it can go dangerously wrong, somebody gave me the example of the DX standard that was written for computers in the late 90s. So for those who don't know, the DX standard basically was written by IBM, Microsoft and Intel, I think. And it was about how computer cases all had to be a standard size, motherboards always had a standard port, graphics cards always spoke with this same language, power systems always operated on the same power system. And what happened was a lot of component manufacture left the US because the standards were so well written that anybody could make these things and compete. What we're trying to do on the Construction Innovation Hub is get the benefits of a standard, but also do it within the constraints of a collaborative team. And much as we've seen with Jim and Dave, that they formed a collaboration, and it's their choice if they want to share what they've learned into the outside world for the bigger benefit of the industry. but there is definitely an area that we need to be careful of, such that we don't end up accidentally making ourselves less competitive. I hope that answers your question.
Jamie, you began your presentation, I guess, by describing automation and how disruption in that context can be viewed both positively and negatively. Have you got anything to add to what the gentleman's question is at all?
I think just that one thing that we need to get better as an industry is just sharing our knowledge between us, and being transparent about what we're willing to share and what we're not willing to share.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Keith, you're looking very enthusiastic there. I assume you've got a question for us.
Thank you. I was a couple of minutes late getting here because I was at a meeting in an architect's office just off the Gray's Inn Road with some of our integrators and a government department. Now that architect practice wasn't Bryden Wood and the client wasn't the Department for Education. However, what was clear from that meeting is some of the stuff that Jamie's been describing, some of the things that Mark and Adam and the seismic chaps have been saying. I got here after Ron had spoken, so I don't know what you said. But there are an awful lot of aligned approaches that are happening in different sectors. They're not joined up yet, but they're aligned. So there was configurators being talked about in that space. Now, just really a question then for Jamie. You talked about automation of design. The conversation I was having with the architects this morning was really about automation of configuration, so it freed up their time and their creative energy to do design. So we're designing products and we're designing platforms, but we're automating the configuration. Is that the way you see it from your business model moving forward?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. So the workflow that I was talking about earlier on the slide deck, but also what we're demoing over on Stand C70, looks at a kind of a site-based initial concept design originating from a configurator. But obviously you could replace that aspect with something that's far more generative, and that's something that we have looked at for other clients in the past, that effectively what you do is you try and understand what the success criteria would be for a successful design on your site, and then build a tool that will generate and auto-solve many solutions that you can then filter down by those success criteria. And this really would enable a kind of automated, generative process right at the beginning, enabling you to explore maybe hundreds, thousands of options, filtering you down to something that's maybe a handful that you want to explore in more detail. So I think that's completely possible.
Sorry, the client who was there, which was a government department, have a need for about 400 of a particular type of building. And there's 3 variants of that building, and each of the building has 4 standard room types that can be used. So you're configuring spaces, but the architects themselves were really keen on making sure that the design, the visual impact, the design quality, the feel from a user experience reflected the needs of the local area, the local community. So they were talking about putting their effort into designing what it looked like based on a standard configurable tools. And they saw a real business opportunity in automating the drudgery of architecture and actually unleashing them to be the creative side. And then how would they work with people who are specifying and setting out their requirements? How will we look at the manufacturing processes that could deliver those products? How we look at the quality systems on how we'd assemble? And of course, how we then work with clients and how they would value those particular aspects that could be offered. It's not about cheap, it's about delivering value. And it's also doing it in a way that unlocks sustainable business opportunities for companies like Bryden Wood and the unnamed architect I was with this morning.
I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to allow architects and designers to to spend more time where they're adding the most value in the design process, which is clearly the kind of developing places that we want to live and work and play, and not manually placing sockets and lights and all of this kind of stuff all the time.
There's a really interesting other side to this as well. So One of the consultants that we're working with on the platform program is Borough Happold. And Borough Happold have this skill set around multi-dimensional optimization. So the point about multi-dimensional optimization is you can't have everything. You can't have a cheap building that's going to last 100 years, that is zero carbon, that is all of these other things. And what we have to realize is our own limitations as architects and engineers, that we always come with a bias. I'm very clear, mine is manufacturing, so I will always want the best design for manufacture, even if potentially that compromises architectural beauty and light and all the things I don't understand. But the way Borough Happold talk about this is everything's mathematically solvable. And effectively, you can come up with an equation that you can then give your client or your person specifying the building the options that they can play with, and they can have something, but it comes at the expense of something else. There are very few that are all mutually beneficial. So again, I would view that the view of an architect really becomes understanding those mathematical equations and working where the best compromise is and where the best tweaks are to give the best possible output that gives value at a system level.
So if I can, I'll come back to the panel. Mark, I guess what you've described in terms of that mathematical equation is a very rational approach to things. I think the audience hopefully would concur that the construction industry is fraught with irrationality and human behaviour. As groups, you've all managed to successfully collaborate multi-parties to achieve a single vision under a platform-based solution. But I'm sure it's had its challenges. So could someone talk me through what some of those challenges have been and how you've managed to overcome them?
Sure. Whenever I started the presentation, I said we started this journey about 2.5 years ago. And when we first started the project, absolutely there were challenges there. We were stepping into a room with a perceived, competitor and wanting to share that information. So having the approach that you have to lay these things at the door, go in very open-minded, and be willing to share, which has been said a few times already. Ultimately, collaboration is key here to get the better outcomes. And just going back to the previous point, yes, the construction industry it's full of waste, and by standardizing and creating these platforms, we're removing a lot of that waste, and hence freeing up our time so that we can deliver and be focused on other areas and deliver better. But yeah, for me, a big challenge was just open-mindedness to share.
Great, thank you. I think we've got probably time for one more question. So is there any final questions from the floor at all? No?
I wanted to just pick up on the last one, if that's all right. There's just a couple of things there. You covered most of it, David. But two challenges I think we've seen on the platform program in the hub. One is that the industry is full of people who think they've got IP. And I think that was mentioned earlier. So as an industry, and I've been in this industry for the whole of my career, so I think I can talk relatively. And I used to be an innovation manager, funnily enough. Everybody thinks they've got IP and they don't want to share it. So I think one of the things that we've been trying to understand is where businesses need to compete or should be competing and where they shouldn't be competing. And that's been quite interesting. I think that's an ongoing process. The second thing, as an overarching comment, I guess, is that we don't know all the answers yet. So the program that we're in, and I'm sure the seismic guys would agree, we're on a journey, and I think that was on one of your slides. We're trying to work with the industry to understand so that we're doing it with them, so we understand where they want to compete and where they don't. So I think it's going to be really interesting over the next 2.5 years or so to start to get to the bottom of some of those questions. And one of those questions is, how much do you standardise and how much don't you standardise? So your point about sending manufacturing elsewhere, I mean, we're doing huge amounts around value and making sure that clients define value. And part of that value framework probably is making sure that we don't send manufacturing elsewhere. And that might be based on all sorts of things, from ethical sourcing to anything. So I think there's a whole lot of work, again, around the edge, but we don't know all the answers. And the only way we're going to get the right answers that hopefully the majority are comfortable with is if we do it with the industry.
Okay, so I'll just to finish this off, I'll quickly go along the line then. So, Ron, you talked about the journey and where we might be in a couple of years. Mark, what's your prediction of where we might be in respect to platforms in, say, 2 years' time?
2 years?
2 years.
Crikey. Well, so we've got 8 integrators. If we can get those 8 integrators having one common view of how our platform approach can work, agreement on the sub-assemblies and all of the interfaces, we're onto a winner, because everything else will follow.
Okay. Ron?
Excellent. I think to spread the platform approach thinking is my main objective. So I think Mark has got very ambitious, and I trust his word that he will deliver that. But actually, if we start to see other things kicking off and other consortiums kicking off the same kind of work, I'll be really pleased. But again, only if it's driving the right kind of behaviours.
Okay, David.
Some of the stuff actually delivered in a real life scheme in a school. So taking the frame, for example, actually a school delivered with that frame and potentially other components within that.
Yeah, I'd like to see the early adopters of government departments building some real things, demonstrating value and enabling the economies of scale to let this move into the private sector as well.
Okay.
I think similar to David, we want to actually see some of these frames in use, and that's definitely going to happen. We've 2 secondary schools that we're working on at the minute at pre-construction stage, so successful delivery of that and some real data in terms of the savings that we've actually made.
I think I'd just add, a closer link, tighter link between physical platforms and digital platforms. That's what I hope.
Okay. So plenty of food for thought there. Thank you to our panel for participating, and thank you for joining us. Have a good day.